into. At 75, I'm no longer afraid of saying this out loud. Religion didn't save me when I needed it most, but something else did. I am 75 years old, into. And the most surprising thing I have learned about religion is not something I heard in a sermon, read in a holy book, or argued about in a crowded room, into. It is something that arrived quietly one early morning when my hands were shaking as I tried to button my shirt, into, and I suddenly realized how fragile everything I once thought was permanent had become. In that moment, standing alone in a small bedroom with sunlight crawling across the floor, into, I understood that faith is not what you shout to the world when you are strong, but what whispers to you when you are tired, afraid, and finally honest with yourself, into. Before we go any further, let me ask you something from the heart. If you believe in kindness, in forgiveness, in second chances, into, then please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel, into. These simple actions help stories like this reach people who may be quietly struggling. Just as I once was, I did not grow up with gentle ideas about religion, into. I grew up with rules that felt heavier than love and with fear disguised as devotion. In my childhood home, religion was not a place of rest, but a place of constant measurement. To every action seemed to be weighed, recorded, and judged. Right and wrong were drawn in thick, unforgiving lines. There was little room for questions, and no room at all for doubt. Into, I learned early that faith, at least as it was taught to me, was something you performed correctly or paid for dearly. Even as a boy, I felt a quiet tension inside me, into. A sense that something essential was missing, though I could not yet name it. As I grew older, that tension grew with me. Into, I watched adults around me use religion as a shield, and sometimes as a weapon. I saw people pray with their lips and wound others with their hands. Into, I saw kindness offered publicly and cruelty practiced privately. These contradictions confused me deeply, but instead of pushing me away immediately, they planted a seed of guilt. Into, I assumed the problem was me. I believed that if I struggled with belief, it meant I was weak or broken or ungrateful. So I tried harder. I followed rules more strictly. Into, I judged myself more harshly than anyone else ever could. By the time I reached adulthood, religion had become a heavy coat I wore in all seasons. Into, even when it made me sweat and itch. I married young, built a family, worked long hours, and tried to be a good person by the standards I had inherited. On the outside, into, my life looked stable, respectable, even admirable. On the inside, I carried a constant anxiety, a fear of failing some invisible test. Every mistake felt catastrophic. Into, every doubt felt dangerous. I prayed not from love, but from fear of punishment and loss. Life, as it always does, began to test those beliefs since I could not control. Into, loss entered my life without asking permission. I lost people I loved deeply, not all at once, but one by one, in ways that left me stunned and angry. I lost my parents. I lost friends. Later, I lost my wife after decades together, a loss that hollowed me out so completely that even breathing felt like work. In those moments, into, the rigid version of religion I had clung to offered me very little comfort. Explanations sounded empty. Promises felt distant. I found myself sitting alone in quiet rooms, into, asking questions I had been trained never to ask. There were nights when I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight with grief, into, wondering why faith felt so loud in other people and so silent in me. I tried returning to old rituals, hoping familiarity would bring peace, but instead they felt mechanical. Into, disconnected from the ache inside my body, I felt abandoned not only by people I loved, but by the certainty I once relied on. And yet, somewhere in that emptiness, into, something unexpected began to happen. It started small, almost unnoticed. A neighbor brought me food after my wife died, not because of shared beliefs, into, because she saw my pain. A stranger listened to me speak about my grief without correcting me, preaching to me, or telling me how to feel, into. I watched a young man help an elderly woman cross a busy street, patient and gentle, with no audience to applaud him. These moments did not come wrapped in religious language, into, but they moved me more deeply than any sermon ever had. Slowly, my understanding of religion began to shift. Into, I stopped asking whether I was believing correctly and started asking whether I was living kindly. Into, I noticed that the moments when I felt closest to something sacred were not moments of perfect obedience, but moments of compassion, humility, and shared humanity. Into, sitting quietly with someone who was suffering felt more holy than reciting words without meaning. Into, forgiving someone who had hurt me felt more transformative than judging them from a distance. This shift did not come easily or without resistance. Into, old fears clung to me stubbornly. Part of me worried that letting go of rigid beliefs meant letting go of morality itself. I feared becoming lost unanchored. But life continued to teach me gently and persistently that kindness does not require fear to exist. Responsibility does not disappear when punishment is removed. In fact, into I found that love became stronger when it was chosen freely rather than enforced. As the years passed and my body aged, I became more aware of time's limits. My hands weakened. Into my steps slowed. My memory occasionally betrayed me. But strangely, as my physical strength faded, my inner life grew calmer. I no longer felt the need to prove my faith to anyone. Into I no longer felt compelled to argue about beliefs or defend labels. What mattered more to me was how I treated the people in front of me, especially when no one else was watching. Into religion, to me now, feels less like a fortress and more like an open field. It is a place where questions are allowed to breathe. Into where doubt is not an enemy but a companion that keeps arrogance away. Where humility matters more than certainty. I have come to believe that if there is something divine, into it must be vast enough to hold all our confusion, grief, and growth without demanding perfection. There were moments, especially in my 60s, into when I felt angry at the years I spent afraid. I mourned the softness I denied myself, the compassion I withheld from my own heart. But age has taught me not to live in regret. Into instead, I try to live in repair. I apologize more easily now. I listen more than I speak. I forgive myself for not knowing earlier what I know now. Into one of the hardest challenges I faced was forgiving people who used religion to hurt others, including myself. For a long time, my anger toward them was justified and fierce. But carrying that anger began to feel like another burden I did not need. Forgiveness, I learned, was not about excusing harm or forgetting pain. It was about freeing myself from being permanently shaped by what wounded me. It was about choosing peace over endless resentment. I also had to confront my own moments of judgment, the times I had quietly felt superior because of my beliefs. This was humbling and uncomfortable, but necessary. True faith, I now believe, begins with the courage to see ourselves clearly, flaws and all. It asks us to soften, not harden, to open, not close, to serve, not dominate. As I look back on my life, I see a long road filled with mistakes, love, fear, growth, and grace. Religion, once a source of anxiety for me, has transformed into something quieter and more human. It lives in small acts of decency, in patience, in choosing to be gentle in a world that often rewards cruelty. It lives in listening to someone's pain without trying to fix them. It lives in offering help without needing recognition. Now at 75, I do not claim to have final answers. I am more comfortable with mystery than I ever was before. I accept that some questions may remain unanswered, and that this is not a failure but a feature of being human. What matters to me is not being right, but being real, not being pure, but being present. If you are younger and struggling with faith, I want you to know that confusion does not mean you are lost. It may mean you are growing. If you have been hurt by religion, your pain is valid. You are not weak for stepping back and breathing. And if religion has brought you comfort and hope, that is beautiful too. There is room for many paths, many experiences, many ways of understanding what it means to live a meaningful life. As I approach the later chapters of my life, I find myself less afraid of what comes next. Not because I am certain of what awaits, because I have learned to trust the values that have sustained me here. Kindness, honesty, compassion. These feel like truths I can carry with me, regardless of what lies beyond this life. Before this story ends, I want to ask you for something personal. If this message resonates with you, if it stirred something in your heart or reminded you of your own journey, please let me know in the comments. Share your thoughts, your doubts, your hopes. Your words may help someone else feel less alone. And now, as we come close to the end, I ask you once more from a place of deep sincerity if this story touched your heart, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel understood, please like this video, share it, and stay connected to this channel. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive, reaching people who may be searching quietly for meaning, just as I once was. At 75, I no longer see religion as a rigid set of answers, but as a lifelong conversation between the heart and the world, a conversation shaped by love, loss, and learning. And if there is one thing I know for certain now, it is this: whatever you believe, let it make you kinder, let it soften you, let it help you love more deeply, forgive more freely, and live more honestly, because in the end, when everything else fades, it is not our certainty that will define us, but our compassion